yeah, in the early days, Quincy said, I'd love to manage you, and his team wanted to manage me. And actually, I said no at first. I said, I just want to do things my own way, but can we just be friends? Which is kind of like Quincy still makes fun of me for it now. It's just like, can we just be friends?
How are you?
Hey, it's so good to see you. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you so much for asking. I'm not doing too bad, all things considered. I've been looking forward to talking to you now since we found out we had you on the show.
Superb. Oh, amazing.
So I hope you could take us through it for people who aren't as familiar with you. Because the first record, the In My Room record, done all on your own, my guess is that the all on your ownness of that record is what leads to you finding collaborators and wanting to kind of step outside of that. Take me from that record by yourself to wanting to work with so many different people.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I'm actually speaking to you right now from the very room that I learned to walk in North London, which is the same room I made that album In My Room in. I still make a bunch of music in this room. In fact, it's a very important room for me. But yeah, essentially what happened at the sort of basis of my career was I was creating very ravenously lots of musical experiments that I found fascinating and interesting, and I was sharing them with the world. And a lot of these experiments were they were all self-created, and they featured me doing a whole bunch of different kinds of musical things. So sometimes I was playing a few different instruments, sometimes I was singing and playing a variety of things. And I was deeply in love with and enamored by the process of that creation. I released that album In My Room, which was a joyous escapade. And I even toured the world with a one-man show around that time. I think one of my favorite shows of that whole tour was actually Edmonton, Canada. It's like a wild tornado that day, and I'll never forget that show. Anyway, I digress. It was about 2 years after My Room came out that I realized, you know what, this is all well and good, and I'm loving it, and I'm loving the one-man shows, and I'm loving the process of learning. But if I really want to know the world, if I really want to sort of get a taste of what life is like outside of the sort of metaphor of the room, I'm gonna have to collaborate with some people. And I was so ravenous to do that at that time, and I thought, like, if I'm going to collaborate, may as well call up all of my favorite musicians who are roaming the earth currently, and ask them if they'd be interested to be a part of the project.
Oh, tell me about that ravenousness, because there is a world in which, hey, this is working really well. I mean, Ed Sheeran's a great example of that up until recently. Hey, this is working really well by myself. I can get up on stage, I can loop, I can get people singing with me. Things are okay. Where that ravenousness you're talking to is that, are you intellectually interested in it? Are you just trying to get a bunch of life experience? What's going on with you wanting to collaborate?
Totally, yeah. It's funny. I don't believe an artist ever really gets to decide what turns them on at any given time. I think it's like in some ways there's a myth that an artist sits around and sort of decides, right, this is what's going to matter to me, and this is what's going to feel cool to do. But the truth is that the best thing you can do as a, I say artist, but really a human, is just to be very awake to and aware of what's tickling you at any given time. And so I was really excited. I would say for all the reasons you mentioned and more. I was certainly sort of intellectually excited at the thought of being challenged and stretched. I was kind of, you could say, spiritually excited at the thought of just kind of getting outside my own way. And musically, I was just so enthralled at the thought of building bridges between worlds that I half understood or was a great fan of. For example, the world of Gnawa, which is Moroccan street music, or the incredible musical world of Mali in Africa, or Korea, or Colombia. All these places I've just been sort of listening so avidly to for so long. I sort of thought what would be cool would be to really go and build this bridge manually, and ask some questions to some of the people I most respect in these walks of life.
So that would be one part of it, like, stepping into folk musics of other parts of the world that you're really interested in, and collaborating with artists that you've had a long love for, or you're sort of interested in. But then there's just the idea of, and this is really, really interesting. So this new volume 4 largely explores the power of the human voice. And I want to talk about the opening piece, which is 100,000 voices, which is literally 100,000 people all singing in harmony together. So to talk me through this, a great fascination with the human voice is what I get from you.
Oh, totally, yeah. Well, here's the thing with the human voice. We all have one, right? And they're all different. And it feels so good to collide them. And I've always felt this. I think at first I didn't realize this was one of my North Stars in such a way, but it really is, especially looking back. My first musical experiments was me layering my voice on top of itself, building these towering structures of different kinds of chords and sequences and things like that. And I think there's like a majesty to the way in which forces can combine harmonically that I've always been really excited about. And I sought to kind of explore that throughout the collaborations on this album. But what I didn't see coming was what has evolved to become what I think of now as the audience choir, like this idea that when I perform live, I can stand on stage and conduct the whole venue of audience members in 3 or sometimes 6-part harmony by giving them each a starting note, delegating zones by gestures, and then moving my fingers and hands up and down to kind of guide their direction without sort of saying a word about the process, just sort of trusting the intuition of the room. And the sound of it and the sight of it and the feeling of it like completely changed my trajectory of life almost. I mean, it sounds like a massive thing to say, but it really seriously made me rethink what music is for, what I'm for, how my particular perspectives and gifts can help people the most. And I think there's something amazing about the idea of giving power to other people's voices over your own. And if I were to say one thing I've learned in the last 6-7 years since in my room, is probably that. It's like the concept that when you think about what's your voice, how do you find your voice as an artist? It's like, for me, I did so much in such a deep solitude of finding my own voice at first, and I think that I've really found the heart of my voice in extending my limbs, extending my intentions through the voices of others, because it's such a joyous occasion.
Has it ever fallen apart?
Oh, plenty of times. Yeah. And sometimes it's the best. Sometimes it's the best moment. You think, well, gosh, what happens if I try and do this ridiculously twisted like harmonic progression? Like, will they follow along? And the worst thing that can happen is that you point up or down, and there's like a split decision. And some people go up a whole step, and some people go up a half step. And if that happens, then you just go back down, and everyone laughs, and it's cool, and you carry on.
Yeah.
So I think one of the best skills I think that you can garner as an artist over time is just to be super comfortable with not knowing what's going to happen. And I think that helps for musical reasons, it helps for confidence reasons, but it also just helps for human reasons. I think it's cool to rock about the world knowing there's a way, even if you can't see it, and trusting the people around you. Like that, it feels like something worth doing.
100,000 voices on this record. Yeah,
it's true. I can't believe it's true, but it really is. So I recorded every single audience choir across 2022 and 2023, and every audience choir of 2022 is on Djesse Volume 4, and they're all on that first track. Then there's in so many ways, there's the sounds of people speaking and singing and clapping and stamping, all sorts of things on that song. But I always wondered, like, what would it be like if I collided all these venues at once, and heard what would that even feel like, and the results are quite goosebump inducing.
What does that feel like to you, to have all that energy come towards you? I understand it from a performing perspective. I understand it from what you're able to do with an audience, what you're able to, the chord sequences you're able to create, the ability you have to allow audience members to sing and participate, how it removes you as a performer, it changes the dynamic of what your actual offering is to the audience. But viscerally, Jacob, I've been, so I'll disclose something about myself here. I've had experiences like this before. So first off, as a performer, I've stood on stage and had a bunch of people sing. And the energy I get, like almost the literal energy I get, is my favorite thing in the entire world. And I've been part,
me too.
And I've been part of like really, I've gone to the north of England, and I've gone to like Sheffield, and gone to like folk singing nights, where there's 40 or 50 people in a pub singing old songs together. And it's my favorite feeling in the entire world. I think I saw you at Glastonbury, a video of you at Glastonbury. Is that right?
Yeah.
So when you amplify that by like, how many people were out there that day, you think?
30,000 at Glastonbury.
So what does that energy feel like when 30,000 people are doing that to you this one dude on a stage?
Yeah, it's funny. I feel I feel outside my body in a sense, but I also feel really in my body. It's a very tingling sensation, I suppose. I feel at my biggest and at my smallest, and both in the best of ways. I feel as big as 30,000 people, which is very big, but I also feel like, because I'm not actually singing, I'm not doing anything at the moment. All I'm doing is enabling them to sing. I also feel like I'm one pixel in an image. It's like this amazing feeling of kind of rendering myself without being at the center, though I am also at the center. So it's a very kind of, in a sense, it's quite a contradictory feeling, because I'm riding this wave, and you'd think, oh, I must feel like on top of the world and very, very powerful, but actually, in a sense, luckily it's not all about me feeling massive. It's about almost like I almost dissolve into the wave of it all, which is really, really special. Glastonbury was a particular experience, because I really, of all the gigs I've ever done, I think that's the one where I had the least confidence it was going to work.
Really?
It was about 31 degrees Celsius, baking hot sun in the middle of the day. We're outdoors, so there's no acoustic help. There's no ceiling to reflect the sound or anything. And I can barely even see beyond the first 5,000 people, because there's just so many people. It's like, incomprehensible number. But I got to the end of one of my songs, and I thought, if I don't give this a try, I'm not gonna sleep tonight. I have to. So I yelled, "Ah!" into the middle, "Ah!" and "Ah!" on the right side, and then I threw my gestures, because it's not easy to project that far. And then there were video screens, but on the video screens you can't see which direction I'm pointing, because the camera could be from any angle.
Yeah.
It was kind of just me, and what I had to trust was that the people at the front would it would somehow flow to the people behind them who maybe couldn't see over their heads, or who were having conversations or on their phone. It's like, come on, you guys, you've got this. And I just threw the notes out there. And then what came back was this like roar of enthusiasm. And the other thing about Glastonbury, for anyone who's ever been there will know, it's like, you've got two other bands playing close by. So, you've got like just around the corner, and like, around the other corner. So it's like we're competing against all odds to make this work. But yeah, the feeling of it working was ridiculously special. It really was.
I want to talk a little bit about how all this came about. Can we go to the clip in 5, Sam? Just take a listen to this.
Don't you worry about a thing. Don't you worry about a thing. Cause I'll be standing on the side when you check it.
So I want to come back to Djesse a little bit later, but what you're listening to right there is Jacob Collier with his cover of Don't You Worry About a Thing. That video has millions and millions of views on YouTube. Ends up playing every instrument. I mean, Jacob was still a teenager at that time. That's definitely when, the music people in my life were texting me and saying, have you heard of this kid over in England? Like, he seems to be able to stack harmonies like no one's ever seen before. He can seem to play anything at an exceptionally high level. So what I'm curious about is, when did you, and listen, humility, this is a Canadian show and I'm talking to someone English, so humility is accepted and taken for granted. We can just get humility out of the way. When did you realize that potentially you had some exceptionalities around music that maybe the other kids in choir and in band and orchestra might not have shared?
Well, I think there were definitely a number of moments when I was growing up where I felt, I don't think my mind is normal. I don't think I'm thinking in a normal way, and not necessarily always in a positive sense. It was kind of like, I'm just not responding to this like other people are doing. And lots of kids around me, for example, wanted to be like really famous when we were at school. Like, man, I just want to be famous. And I always remember thinking, like, why would you want that? That's a strange thing to want. Everything in your life would probably get harder, and you'd probably have less time to do the things that you want to do. And I don't remember being like massively averse to it, but it didn't turn me on. That was the thing. And going back to what we said before, I think certain things just kind of didn't excite me. I think they excited other kids, but then other things deeply excited me that I felt like other kids maybe weren't necessarily so interested in. So like, a particular chord or sound or sequence of chords or a feeling, or even the way words felt inside my mind, and the way that when I put them together, all that stuff, I think I always just felt like I had a very deep inner world, like a sort of inner understanding of how these components could be combined. And you ask around, oh yeah, what do you think? Isn't this crazy? And you think someone say, yeah, kind of, and then after a while you sort of think, well, maybe it's best if I just go and build the thing that I want to hear. It's fun. I often think about that. You make the music that you wish existed. I had this kind of like real strong feeling that I should pursue that world. And I've been layering my voice on top of itself for a long, long time before Don't Worry About a Thing. I think I got my first recording software when I was 7. I got Cubase, and then when I was 11, I moved over to Logic, and I got an SM58 microphone, and it was really fun. And I would go and learn songs at school and bring them back home and recreate them from memory and things like that. But it's funny. I think everyone has weird twists about the way that they think, and and nothing feels odd or strange until someone points it out to you and says, "Hey, man, that what the hell is that? You know, what are you doing there?" Or "I don't think that's a good idea." You know, there was also a lot of that. But you know, I feel genuinely lucky that I sort of came up in a space in my home environment. I was raised by a single mother with my two little sisters, and there was just this constant feeling that I could go anywhere or be anything or change shape and just figure out who I was. And I think in the changing of my shape, which when you're a kid is like constant, you know. One moment you're like a massive bear, and the next moment you're like a tiny squirrel, and then you change. You know, it's like you're always morphing for the people around you, for the systems around you, and all that kind of stuff. But I always had this like extreme core anchorage in my kind of belief that my inner world mattered. And for that, I can take no credit. I have to give credit there to my mom, really. Um, and I think I'm just grateful that I was able to tune into it for long enough as a kid for it to sink its roots so deeply into me that I couldn't not make music when I was older.
I really appreciate you saying that, and I think what you said there is something that we don't talk about enough. Is that in my life, and if you listen to this show, you'll know that sometimes you'll talk to people who have certain exceptionalities around music and around art from a very, very young age, and it presents itself like a very, very good thing. And of course, it is. You know, you're great at a party, you're fun in a choir,
right.
You can play anything you want, and you get a lot of attention. Also, sometimes the things that make you exceptional, one thing can be frustrating, or they can make you feel isolated, or they can make you feel alone. But you said something there. You were like, "Hey, the other kids in my class wanted to be famous," and you were thinking to yourself, "Geez, that's not something I want." You don't get a lot of time for yourself. You don't get a lot of time to do the things you do. I'm just making this art. So when the millions and millions of views come in, and you're getting all this attention, and Jacob, you become like internet famous, which is very new and very overwhelming. How was that?
Well, I'm grateful for a number of things, but one of them is I think is that I never had like a really accelerated moment of increase of my fandom. It was always kind of a steady curve, you know. And there were definitely moments where things like kicked up a notch, like that video of "Don't Worry About a Thing." That was one of them. And when I was nominated for Album of the Year at the Grammys, that was another where so people were like, "Oh, hang on a minute, this is a thing," you know. But you know, there are all these moments that come and go in your life, and I think I'm glad that it didn't happen in a flash, you know, because you see these people on the internet, and they one morning they wake up and then make a video and post it, and then the next morning they wake up and they've got 20 million views, and that I just can't think of a single person in this world who would be cool with that, like and would find that straightforward, because that comes fraught with problems. I mean, some people make amazing things out of those kinds of opportunities, but it's hard. So, you know, I look at the decade I've just had, and I'm grateful for the kind of the steadiness of my conviction in a sense, and not having bent into different directions. I mean, there were lots of people in the early days who sort of said, right, you know, we're going to sign you to a label, and we're going to give you a bunch of you know, money, and we're going to do X, Y, Z, and all that
get you to write some pop songs, or try to get you to make something really.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you know what? It's important to say there's absolutely nothing wrong with writing pop songs, money, or record labels, any of that stuff. But it wasn't for me at that time, and so I was able to say, do you know what? I don't really want to do that. I'm just going to make this album by myself, and I'm so glad I did that, because the amount I learned from executing something like that by myself was just so much more colossal than I would have learned had I jumped through all the hoops. And it's so funny now in the music industry, looking around, you know, there are so many people who along the way said to me, you know, Jacob, you just can't do things like this. That doesn't work. Or, you know, people won't listen to the music, or, you know, you're going to lose streamers and listeners and all that kind of stuff. And in a funny kind of a way, I feel like I operated with such a strong North Star creatively that I almost forgot about the other stuff. And I always had the sense that if I just built trust with the people who did understand the things I was kind of trying to make, and obviously that's partly my audience, but it's also, you know, my collaborators and other artists in the community and my friends and my family, those relationships at the end of your life, you know, you just have those, that nothing else was ever real except for those relationships you've built and taken care of. So for me, I've always felt really strongly about, it's literally just that. And if you just do that bit right, and you say, here I am, I'm just Jacob, and whatever you think of that, it's the best I can be, it's the biggest I can be, is that. And if I show up for that, then I'm doing the best I can. That it's kind of proven itself to not only bring me a lot of joy, but it's also resulted in, I think, an amount of trust within my audience around the world, which I'm so grateful for. And it's that kind of trust I think that I can extend into an audience choir in a sense. It's kind of like, I've got you, and I know you've got me. Let's just have fun together and see where it goes.
I also know that Quincy Jones is really important in this. Like, I know
Massively,
Quincy Jones, the legendary record producer. The story is, does he call you? Like, he sees the video and calls you? Is that it?
Yeah. Well, so he found his way to Don't Worry About a Thing, or I should say, Don't Worry About a Thing found its way to the big Q. And yeah, he sent me an email, actually. He sent me an email saying, "Hey, I'm Quincy, and like, what are those chords you're playing? What are those chords you're singing in that song of yours?" And I was just so excited. I thought, that's crazy to me. Here's a man who's taught me and everyone I know music, basically, from all the records he's made, from all the things that he's stood for, all the ground he's broken in the industry. It's just been so extraordinary to be inspired by him for this all the time. And here he is in my inbox, sliding into my DMs, as it were, before DMs, this is. And I was just so kind of thrilled that the world sort of bent around in this great big bendy spoon to put me and Quincy together. That friendship ended up being, well, it still remains, but it ended up being really important for me, especially at the beginning, with regard to how I thought about the music industry and how to navigate it. You've got a man there who was absolutely fearless to try new stuff, to differentiate himself from others, and to go places that no one else had ever been before, but always to do it with like a sense of humanity. So, I learned so much from hanging with Quincy and asking him questions and digging into the stories. And he's full of crazy stories. It's like this one time I was hanging out with Picasso or Stravinsky or Charlie Parker, and it's just like, holy crap, you were there at that time, you were meeting these people, you were hanging, just absolutely amazing. So in the early days, Quincy said, I'd love to manage you, and his team wanted to manage me, and I said no at first. I said, I just want to do things my own way, but can we just be friends? Which is kind of like Quincy still makes fun of me for it now. It's just like, can we just be friends? But it's what I said, and it's what happened for about a year and a half. And then as In My Room came to life, I ended up realizing, actually, Quincy and his really talented bunch of people working around him could indeed help me plan some things in my life logistically and put the campaign together. So in the end, that ended up happening. But I really deeply appreciate and always have done Quincy's kind of openness to me being on my own terms and just being like, what, let Jacob do what he wants, because that's the best thing for Jacob. And not everybody's built from that stuff, but Quincy certainly is.
So the relationship with Quincy Jones is helps you navigate the music industry as things, you're right, ramp up really quickly. You like you mentioned earlier, you end up getting nominated for a Grammy for Album of the Year, which has to be pretty overwhelming. That's a pretty wild thing to happen. And then if you're Canadian, you would have seen Jacob the other night, I mentioned this, playing on the Grammys with Joanie Mitchell as she does her first ever Grammy performance. Tell me a story about that. Tell me, give me something. It's Joanie Mitchell.
So first thing to say is, as I'm sure many of you listening would agree, Joanie is one of the founding pillars of music. She taught me so many things growing up about honesty and transparency and fearlessness and sound worlds and chords and lyrics, everything. She's just one of the absolute goats, And so I first met Joanie back in 2021 when she was really just recovering from the brain aneurysm, which completely took away her ability to speak, her ability to walk. She, in her own words, she's kind of back from the dead, and I went to her extraordinarily beautiful house back then to play some songs with her. That's actually also the day that I met Brandi Carlile. And Brandi said, Joanie would love to meet you and love to jam with you, and why don't you come along and hang? So I came along to hang. I was totally overwhelmed, mind blown. Every wall in that house is hand painted by Joanie, and there's all these extraordinary portraits of her friends, and obviously her friends are like Charles Mingus and Miles Davis and all these people, and they're all around the house. And Joanie's sitting there in this chair. And back then, she really wasn't communicating too much, and she certainly wasn't participating musically. She was mostly just listening, and occasionally would whisper a line, and everyone would hush and think, gosh, this is extraordinary. And fast forward, 3 years, I went to her house, it was about 2 weeks ago now, I suppose, to rehearse for the Grammys when I'd learned that I was doing it. And Joanie's sitting there sparkling, her little gray eyes, just shining, sparkling eyes. She was totally there, totally present, ears wide open, eyes wide open, full of mischief. It's a whole different vibe from when I first encountered her. And, we play both sides now in C major. And it's the best C major I've ever been in, I think, was on that Grammy stage, I spent a lot of time in C major as a kid, but this was a whole different thing. And yeah, the whole first verse I got to just play. It was just me and Joanie. I got to play in C for a little while, and Joanie sang, "Rose and flows of angel hair," which is really low for her voice, but she's super comfy down there these days. And but every time we played Both Sides Now in rehearsal, it came out different from her because she's such a natural rephraser, improviser. She thinks of herself as a jazzer. She's super influenced by all of those peers of hers from back in the day, the Herbie and Miles and Mingus, all those amazing people, Jacko too. And so she finds a different space, a different gap to enter into the phrase. And she'll wait slightly longer than she did before to sing, and feather canyons everywhere.
And you're going like, hold on, okay,
hold on. Yeah. So for me, it was a total trip. Not just because I was, like ears wide open and making sure I was supporting her, but just because I didn't know what she was going to do. And I get extremely fed by that. I love that feeling of just following along, and I think she also loves that feeling. So we had a really special kind of musical handshake that was tactile on that stage for me.
Let's just use Both Sides Now as an example for what I'm about to ask you about, because it's something I've been really curious about you and about sort of a new generation of musicians for a really, really long time, coming from folk music, coming as I do from folk music. So there would be people you would talk to who would say, "Hey, do you like Both Sides Now by Joanie Mitchell?" And they would say things like, "Oh, I love Both Sides Now by Joanie Mitchell. I love that it starts on a one chord, 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1." And then I love the chord sequence here. I love her. I love her choice of chord progression here. I love her use of leading tones. I love her use of the scale. I love her use of the flat 7. And you would find yourself sometimes going like, sure, but the song is a beautiful song about seeing life in a different way. I'm hearing so much heart from Joanie.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of conversations with people over the past little while about whether or not, and I will say I'm excluding you from this, but whether or not a lot of musicians get caught up in the technical aspects or the harmonic aspects or the musical aspects of the music that they're listening to.
Yeah.
And there's not as much of a focus on heart. I've had conversations with people who say like, oh, the thing I want to listen to is a field recording of a guy out in the middle of a field who's a shepherd singing songs to his sheep. He's flat, but there's heart there. As someone who is so incredibly technically adept, like you're really at the height of technical ability at your instruments. You can kind of do anything, and you can kind of express you can kind of tell me exactly what you're doing technically as you're doing it. What's your relationship like with heart and technique?
Yeah, it's a fabulous question and phrased brilliantly. Well, I think, it's funny. I think technicality has gotten, as you mentioned, some bad press over the years at being like the opposite of heart, which to me kind of blows my mind. It's like, that's not how it works at all in my mind. Though I do think there is such a thing as being distracting. And I also think there's such a thing as your ego getting too much involved and wanting to prove something. You can want to prove something by playing nothing, or you can want to prove something by playing everything. And both sides of that, not to use the pun, but both sides of that, I think, can be unhelpful. I mean, the fundamental thing with music is, you can literally do whatever you want. Whatever feels right to you is probably the right thing for you to be doing, and you should just do that. But I think over the years, following along with what excites me, different sorts of axes reveal themselves as thrilling to me at different times. So, 10 years ago, for example, I think I was on the edge of my seat with chords. I had just figured out that you could microtonally modulate in good taste. Like it was new to me, the idea of doing that. You can modulate to the key of G half sharp major in a very careful, thoughtful, you could say technical way, but it smashes you in the heart, in the process of doing that. Nowadays, I feel like I'm less. I live less on that particular precipice and more on other precipices. I think I'm right now totally dazzled by the potential of what's possible from a stage and what's possible with an audience and in collaboration. I mean, it sounds on the nose in a sense to say it, but I think my fascinations have evolved to move. But I don't think of them as on the axis of complex to simple, but per se. I think of them as on a total variety of different sorts of depths and distances and things to measure. You can create a very, to my era, a very benign and you could even say dull piece of music with a lot of information in it. That's I've heard that before. And equally, you can create a piece of music that's extremely compelling with one or two things going on and nothing changes. And I would suggest, like, if anyone wants to sort of stretch their ears and mind about what's possible with those axes and how those axes affect the heart, you have to push yourself to the edge, right to the edge of your seat. You have to try everything. Otherwise, you never know.
You could not have made me more delighted with that answer. That's such so.
Oh, that's good.
So beautifully put, and it made me challenge some of my own biases, and it made me. I mean, people listening to this gave him a great idea into sort of like there is no. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to music. There is no sort of black and white of heart versus technique. Jacob, lovely to meet you. Thanks so much for the time.
You too. Thanks ever so much.